Hello again, and welcome back to the Racing Writers Podcast. As always, I'm your host, Kelly Crandall. For this week's episode, I'm not going to give a long introduction because, quite frankly, Larry McReynolds doesn't need it. And Larry was such a good interview that I really want to get to it as quickly as possible. So what I will say to set this up is that this interview was recorded 2 weeks ago at Michigan International Speedway on Friday evening after the day's activities. Larry met me in the media center, and we talked about 30 minutes of everything that goes into his work with Fox. As a side note, thank you to Megan Engelhart for helping coordinate with Larry to make this conversation happen. There's also going to be a written piece to accompany this podcast, so as you should already be doing, I hope you check out racer.com and you'll have additional content for this interview. And before we get to the show, I will have to ask again that if you leave a rating and review and also spread the word on the show, maybe on your social media pages, that really helps bring in attention and keeps it growing, and I appreciate it tremendously. So now, here we go. Larry McReynolds on the Racing Writers Podcast. Your broadcasting skills are just phenomenal to me.
You.
This is what, year 18 I believe.
Ended up 18, yeah.
With Sunday's race here at Michigan, we'll have two more for this year on Fox. Kind of first, professionally, how do you feel after year 18 with two races left?
Yeah, I mean, I almost have to just pinch myself to even realize it's been 8 years, much less 18 years. And here's the amazing thing, to know that when we end up this 18th season of NASCAR on Fox, so many of us are the same group that walked into Daytona back in February of 2001. You got Mike Joy, Darrell Waltrip, myself, Chris Myers, Matt Yoakum. As far as on-air talent, we've had a few changes on pit road. And of course, Michael joined us a few years ago, and of course, Jeff most recently. But then even our production truck, Barry Landis, Artie Kempner, Pam Miller. It's the same people, plus a host of others that went in that truck when we did our very first broadcast back in 2001, 17 years ago. And I love what I do. I hope I'm with them as long as they've got NASCAR. People ask me about retiring. I go, I'm kind of like Bobby Bowden. When you retire, there's only one more big event left in your life, and I'm certainly not ready for that one. But it is very, very hard to believe, because I was a crew chief for 18 years, so that means now I've mirrored the length of my career as a crew chief now as a broadcaster.
Wow, that's a neat little kind of tick on the mantle. I hadn't realized that. It's 18 for both. Yeah,
18 years for both. This is my 38th year to be a part of NASCAR, and that's even harder to believe.
So when they say somebody has truly probably seen and heard it all, you've been around for a lot of that.
And seen it from a lot of different angles. Obviously I came in as a crew member for a very small team in September of 1980 out of Greenville, South Carolina. Worked for a lot of little teams the first part of my career, and then went to work for Kenny Bernstein when he bought that team in 1985 for the 1986 season. First team that actually I was the full-blown crew chief for, but the first team that I worked for that ran the full schedule that had a major sponsor. Yeah, I've seen a lot of growth. I've seen a lot of change. And for the most part, it's all been good. I'd love to think every change that came along was better, but I don't think that holds true in anything. But for a guy from Birmingham, Alabama, that barely got a high school diploma, that was working in, use a sophisticated term, a salvage yard instead of a junkyard, to know what I've been able to be a part of and been able to accomplish. If you don't think dreams can come true, you just speak with me for about 10 minutes, and I promise you, I'll prove to you they can.
Right. So, and then putting on kind of your race fan hat and observing the first half of this season, what's been some of the things that have stood out from you just from a racing perspective, maybe not a broadcasting perspective, just what you've seen so far?
I still believe we have a good product on the track. And, you would think if somebody had not been paying attention, that if I told you in 14 races we've only had 6 different winners, they would probably go, ooh, I don't know, that doesn't sound that good. But I think the fans are embracing the domination we have right now because it's 3 guys. It's not just one guy dominating the sport. It's Truex, it's Kyle Busch, and it's Kevin Harvick. And to know that in the first 9 races, we had 2 drivers that each won 3 consecutive races, that's intriguing to me. We've seen some surprises on the other flip side of things. The Chevrolet, they've been a little slow coming out of the gate, especially Jimmy Johnson. I mean, who would ever believe when he went to victory lane at Dover last spring that we would be sitting here now talking about a 37 race winless streak and only 3 top 5 since that win? You could have got every bit of my money, but we're starting to see the Chevrolets creep up on it. The Fords across the board they're just dominating, but I mean, Kyle Busch is keeping them in check in that Toyota.
So the fact that you were able to just reel off of Jimmy's numbers is one of the main reasons I really wanted to talk to you. Again, you're the things that you can talk about and the way you approach broadcasting is unbelievable to me. And I guess the biggest thing to me is I've heard, just in talking to Megan, is when I brought this up, the first thing she said to me is, he prepares so hard. And you can tell that with how you approach the sport and you talk about the sport and the things that you know. So I guess kind of take me through maybe how you prepare each week and each weekend, because it sounds like you kind of still approach your job like a crew chief, very notes driven, and you have all the information and you're ready to go. No,
you're right. I mean, I'm an all-in type of a guy. It doesn't matter, and my wife would probably support this 100%. It does not matter what I do. I'm all in, and I don't believe in half doing anything, whether it's something on a personal side or something on a professional side. And I'll start thinking about Iowa, even though it's a standalone Xfinity Series race. We're doing the broadcast pretty much from the studios in Charlotte. But I'll probably start preparing for that race before I even leave here on Monday morning. I'll come out of the booth Sunday night, I'll go to the motor coach and have some dinner, and I'll probably start sitting down and making some notes, getting ready for our conference calls the early part of the week. And, again, I'm an all-in guy, and you're right. I don't treat this any different than I did as a crew chief. But they are very, very different. As a crew chief, you didn't need anybody to tell you were doing good. You knew. You had instant measuring sticks. You had a stopwatch. You had qualifying results. You had race results, where you stood in the points if you were in championship contender. So I never needed anybody to say you're doing good or you're doing bad. That's still the one thing I struggle with broadcasting is there's just no measuring stick. I don't have bosses that call every week and say you did this good or you did this bad, and I love constructive criticism. That's the only thing that makes you better. If everybody just tells you you're doing good all the time, it's okay, great. I love that, but what can I do better? What can I do different? And I struggle not having that measuring stick, and even after 18 years. As a crew chief, I always felt like that if I worked hard and I was successful, that I had nothing to worry about. Believe it or not, even after 18 years of being a broadcaster, I still job fear. Even though I work hard, I know that that's not all of it. That if I have to stay relevant, and that's a challenge when you're not working for a race team. It's one reason if that garage is open, if I'm not in that broadcast booth, I'm in that garage. If I get a chance to go visit a race shop, I go visit a race shop. I know I have to do that to stay relative, and I get a little upset sometimes. I even get my feelings hurt a little bit. I even get mad when I hear people talk about my shelf life. It's like, well, what do you mean about my shelf life? I'm staying as relative as I feel like a broadcaster can stay outside if I just went back to work for a race team, just trying to stay on top of it. I don't know if there's a day goes by that I'm not doing something relative to what I do for Fox. Even after we finish up our season, once we finish up in Sonoma, I'm still in the studio 2 or 3 times a week, but I still try to stay relative because our sport, you could walk away, I think, from football or basketball or baseball. You could walk away for a few months and you could come back and probably still be okay, because you know what? A touchdown will still be 6 points. A field goal will still be 3. A ball that goes over the fence is still called a home run. our sport changes weekly, not just yearly, but weekly, and I feel like that's one reason I have to stay engaged if I want to still be successful as a broadcaster and stay relative.
And when you're putting your notes together, what are some of the things that you're looking for, or maybe you want to take notice of? What, I guess, really kind of what consists of your notebook?
Yeah, you know, all of us as broadcasters, we can write the stats down.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they're right there in a stat book. You know, tell where a guy's in points and how many top fives. But what I try to pay attention to is what the drivers are saying, what the crew chiefs are saying. I try to really listen closely. You know what? In the evening time, I watch NASCAR America, and then I'll flip over and watch Race Hub if I'm not in the studio, because I want to hear what other people are saying. You know, if there's a driver they interview about the upcoming race weekend, that he says something that resonates with me. And you know, I co-host a Sirius radio show on Tuesday night, and I really try to listen closely when we have guests to see something that they say that might resonate, maybe from the past race weekend, but especially spinning ahead toward the upcoming race weekend.
And mentioning, you know, you're in the garage, you're talking to crew chiefs, you're talking to drivers, and all of that. So does that make it easier in a sense of when the broadcast is going on, you can pull from what you were in the garage learning, because you understand what they're thinking and what their strategy is? Because that's one of the things impressive to me is I'm sure some of it comes with experience, of course, mm-hmm. of calling these races and seeing how they kind of develop throughout the course of a day. But does that make it easier as well as you can talk about strategy, you can talk about maybe, you know, pit cycles and what you would do, because you can call upon experience as well as what you've been in the garage getting?
Yeah, even simple little things like I didn't get to go in there long this morning, but I went in there just for 30 minutes before I had to go to a production meeting. I knew we only had an hour practice before qualifying. I knew we got a little bit of forecast for rain, so I kind of knew what people were going to tell me, but I wanted to go in there and confirm that probably a lot of teams were going to focus on qualifying only, but a lot of teams were nervous about the forecast tomorrow, and they were going to make one race run and then flip over to qualifying. I kind of knew that, but I wanted to go in there and confirm that, and I did confirm that. It's just like last week at Pocono. I knew with the package that we had there, which was our conventional package, but the way the stages were laid out, that strategy was absolutely going to be all over the place. And I went in there, and from the minute I stood there at the gate with the crews and walked in on Sunday morning because I wanted to get in there and talk to as many different crew chiefs from as many different organizations as I could, just to kind of get a feel if I saw a trend or I saw a pattern. And there's no question that helped me go in that booth on Sunday and forecast what we were going to probably see. And to me, that's what makes a really good analyst. And Fox has kind of taught me this since day one, that a good analyst can talk about what just happened. A really good analyst can forecast what's going to happen. And that's one thing that I really, during the races, you know, pride myself in. The other thing is I respect all those guys in that garage area, and I think most of them, they've learned me over these 18 years that I'm not out to burn anybody. I'm not going to go to that broadcast booth and say, Rodney Childers told me, Todd Gordon told me. I kind of take what I hear, and then I kind of just go up in the booth. I love to give people credit when they feed me information, but I also respect what they've told me. So I try to go up there and just kind of give a general consensus what the garage area is doing or what the garage area is kind of feeling about a certain situation. The one thing I also pride myself in and work hard at is not saying that was a bad call. You know, people second guessed me for 18 years as a crew chief about calls I was making, and I probably needed to be second guessed about a number of them. But what I basically do is, here could be the consequences from that call. And it happened at Richmond with a call that Brian Patty made with short pitting Ricky Stenhouse. I didn't really come out and say that was a bad call. I said it might work out, but if a caution comes out, it's not going to be good. He's going to be about 2 to 3 laps down, and he's not going to be able to make up that ground. Fortunately for Brian and for Ricky, we did go caution free, and it worked out great.
And again, being able to forecast, if this happens, this could be the X result, but if this happens, this could be the Y result. Like, just being prepared
to
for
me,
all of those scenarios.
that's no matter whether it's NASCAR, football, baseball, basketball. That's what makes a good analyst is being able to lay out what's unfolding here and what could happen and what could be the consequences. You know, another thing I do, Kelly, is I'm a sports fan. Mm-hmm. You know, I love football especially, but I watch other analysts for other sports to kind of get a feel for how what their characteristics are, what they're kind of saying. I've done that almost ever since I became a broadcaster, and I think that's helped me, not just watching NASCAR. And, you know, honestly, when I watch NBC's broadcast, you know, you would think as a Fox broadcaster, I watch it to see the things that I don't like that they do. I don't. I watch it to see the things that I do like, because you do pick up on other things from other people.
We disagree on football, college football teams, just as a side note, but I still like it.
So who is your?
The Georgia Bulldogs.
Well, my daughter goes to Georgia, so we had a very interesting January the 11th.
I'm sure you did. Oh my gosh. Where do you take in the race, in a sense? Because you're not in the booth anymore calling lap by lap. So what is your setup in terms of how you view the race? What can you see? Maybe how many monitors? Can you just shed some insight into how you take in the race? Yeah, and
I'd love for you to come up to the booth at some point and see it, because it is quite the setup. And I'm very proud that I have all the tools to work with that I have. You know, my talk box, I can open my mic myself anytime I want. Okay. But I've also, in this role, I've kind of taken on the role or the philosophy of less can be more sometimes. I'll tell you one broadcaster that I've paid a lot of attention to, and he really doesn't do analyst work as far as the game, but he does pregame analysts and postgame analysts, is Howie Long. Howie Long doesn't say a lot. It's hard when you got Terry Bradshaw. Yes. But when he says it, it's like, you know, that makes sense. So I've kind of almost taken that philosophy that less can be more sometimes. If you just, when you say something, make it be effective. But in there's some places, like at Charlotte, like at Pocono, where I'm right next door to Mike and Daryl and Jeff, and there's nothing but a window separating us. And that makes life so much easier, because I know those guys and I can tell when they're taking a beat and I can jump in. Here, it's seat of the pants, because they're at one end of the tower and I'm at the other end. We go to Sonoma in 2 weeks. They'll be in the booth above the grandstands. I'll be out there in the drag race tower. So you have to be a little more careful.
So it changes from week to week.
Right, but it's so much nicer and more comfortable, because it's almost like we're carrying on a conversation with a window between us. But I have my main monitor that the broadcast, and it's also my telestrator that I can telestrate with. I have the scoring monitor up there that obviously, if you pay attention to that scoring monitor, you can almost call the race from that score monitor, because it has a lot of information on it. You know, it loops together where there's a tight battle for position. It tells you the fastest lap that driver's run, the last lap, what lap he last pitted on, what lap he ran his fastest lap on. It's just a plethora of information. And then I have another monitor over here that I can look at probably 50 different things. But I really keep it mainly during the race on, it's called a pit stop matrix. I can show you, it shows me every driver in the order they're running at that particular time, every pit stop they made, if it was under green, if it was under yellow, what they did on that pit stop, what their pit road time was and what their stop time was, and if they had a penalty on that stop. It's a lot of information, but I live a lot by that monitor right there. And then I actually have a right-hand man up there, Steve Shaw, which I would hate to do this without Steve Shaw, because he has two systems he's working with. One is our Ford Performance car. Whenever you see me using that on the broadcast, he's the one moving that around. I'm just doing the talking and possibly the telestrating, because it's a lot to manipulate that thing in sync with what you're saying, and think about saying what you need to say too. So he does that. And then we also have a system up there that we call the Eagle system. It's where he can go back and look at pit stops in slow motion and rewind it and wind it back again. And he'll simply get my attention and say, hey, come and look at this. And I would say 3 out of every 5 times he brings something to my attention, I'll look at it. I'll hit Barry Landis, our producer, and say, hey, like for example, Logano's pit stop at Pocono last week where they didn't get it car full.
Yes.
We kept looking at that and then finally went back and aired it that the gas man backed away to let the tire changer go around, and then when he went to put the probe back in, he couldn't get it engaged into the car. So I got a lot of tools up there. I feel very blessed. And honestly, Kelly, I feel very blessed also because when they hired Jeff 3 years ago, I had 1 more year on my contract, and they very could have easily just found a little something for me to do until the end of my contract, and it could have even been at the studio and not even been at the racetrack. So I feel very blessed and very fortunate that they found a role for me, and I feel like it's a role that has panned out well, and honestly, I love the role I'm playing. Do I miss still being over there doing the normal analyst? Well, of course. You don't do something for 15 years and not miss it. It's like people ask me, do you miss being a crew chief? Well, hell yeah, I did it for 18 years. Of course I miss it. But I do love the role that I play now. And as much as I wasn't sure about Jeff Gordon, I never worked with Jeff. Conversations I had with him from 1992 till he went to work for us, you could count on one hand and probably have 2 or 3 fingers left over. But Jeff Gordon has become an amazing teammate. And what I love about Jeff, he pushes me. And I like to be pushed. I like to be challenged. That's what I loved about so many of the drivers that I worked with as a crew chief. They challenged me. They pushed me. And that's what Jeff Gordon does. Jeff Gordon will text me at 10:30 at night on a Wednesday night going, hey, have you ever thought about, have you ever looked into this, or have you ever looked into that? I love that. That's what drives me, is when somebody pushes me or somebody challenges me to something.
So, I didn't want to cut you off.
No.
So, 2 things from what you said right there. First off, the way that you just described what you're doing and how blessed you are and all the tools you have, it's almost like you're really still a crew chief, but now you're just overseeing the entire field instead of one car.
I've kind of felt that way since day one. When they formed our original team, Mike Joy was our play-by-play, and Daryl was the driver analyst, and I was the crew chief analyst. And really, even before I've taken this role on now, I felt like I was the crew chief for all the teams. I just didn't have to take the heat for a bad call on Monday morning. But, I've even said this, Kelly, if for some reason, and this is not going to happen, but if for some reason I went back to work for a race team and one of my jobs was to call the race, I feel like now I could call the race better than when I was a crew chief because of what I've watched and looked and learned over the last 18 years. Yeah. And I'm not so sure that I wouldn't want to try to call the race from somewhere up top, because it's a lot easier. It's a heck of a lot easier to get your arms around what's going on when you can see the whole picture rather than sitting on a pit box and just seeing them go by, every once in a while. But yeah, it's...
And it sounds like nothing has really, you didn't really change your approach or anything when you moved from the booth to what you're doing now.
I didn't, but what it has allowed me to do, which is one of the things that I enjoy, when you're in that other booth, it's talk, move on. Talk, move on. Now, like I was telling you with Steve Shaw and I and our Eagle system, I can sit and analyze something for 4 or 5 minutes, really formulate what it is,
what happened,
and then go to air.
Yeah.
When you're in the other booth, you don't have that luxury.
Yeah. I wanted to hit on that as well because I'm fascinated by that. So one of the things that I love is when you are able to pick stuff out and maybe something happened on a pit stop or the guys in the booth are wondering, what happened maybe before an accident or whatever it was. And you have that, hey, look, this is, let's zoom in here. So you have help in that sense, but you're also getting to look at it and kind of be like, what, I think this is what led to this.
Yeah, Steve Shaw is looking at stuff on that Eagle system, we call it, nonstop. He never quits. And if he picks up on something, especially if he hears something that was being talked about, like Logano's pit stop and running out of fuel, then it resonates with him. And that's when he'll get my attention. I'll go over there, we'll let it together. There's sometimes I go, Steve, I don't really see anything there. He'll go, okay, he never really challenged me.
Right.
But there's sometimes I go, holy crap, that's exactly spot on. It's like Truex's pit stop. We picked up on the fact that when the guy rode the tire, it hit the tire changer's foot and fell over and loosened the jack handle. That stuff you can't pick up on just watching the broadcast. Yeah. You have to go back and review it. And so Steve knew that Truex had a problem. He knew Logano had a problem. So he goes back and looks at those kind of in slow motion, running it back and forth and back and forth. Sometimes you'll pick up on something, sometimes there's nothing there.
So very rarely you're really kind of catching stuff in real time.
Yeah,
you have a chance to go
hard.
back and look.
It's very hard. Sometimes you're lucky enough to, but sometimes it's hard. As far as I know, our NFL on Fox group uses that very similar system, going back and looking at different plays and the way a play set up, and that's how I think they come up with some things that they picked up on.
So 2 more things for you. When you do shows in the studio or maybe things online or whatever it is, you're not afraid to get all fired up and kind of really offer your opinion. Going back to what you said earlier, I think guys respect you because they know you're not going to burn them, but you're not afraid to let people have it either. Maybe 2 recent examples are Chase Elliott, Chase and Stenhouse at Kansas, racing each other too hard, and how Christopher Bell was treated after Kansas last year. Yeah. You're not afraid to get fired up.
No, I'm not. I'm very passionate about this sport. It's all I've ever done. It's all I've ever known. It's been wonderful to me and my family. And when people do or say things that to me is not in the best interest of the sport, it fires me up. And when I hear drivers talk about other drivers racing them hard, it's definitely one of my hot buttons. When I see a driver just drive into the side of a race car after a checkered flag to rebel against another driver, it's a hot button, because those 2 drivers are going to get out of those race cars and go to their motor coach and shower and hop on a helicopter and fly to the airport to get on their jet to fly home. Those race cars have to go back to a race shop, and guys that are working endless hours now, they have to repair those cars, and an owner has a huge expense. And I've told every driver I ever worked with, and especially Brandon, my son, at races, I'll support you 100% if you beat and bang on the racetrack during the racing. But after that checkered flag, especially Brandon, your butt's mine if you go to beating and banging with that race car, because I know who's going to have to fix it and I know who's going to have to pay for it. And,
right.
But no, I am very passionate. I don't want to be over the top all the time, but when I do think there's something that needs to be amplified, no, I'm not afraid to do that.
I want to end it with this, going back to kind of how we started the interview, just talking about the sport in general, both as a broadcaster and having lived the sport. What is it after all of this time? Because you said you want to stay as long as Fox is here. But for you personally, what is it that keeps you coming back every year? That you haven't fallen out of love with this sport?
Yeah, I would be willing to say it's far more than just one thing. I love the competition. I love going to that booth and trying to predict strategy or what may come out. When I was a crew chief, you were very rewarded when you were leading the race. You were very rewarded when you won the race. You were very rewarded when you sat on the pole. But I guess when I forecast something and it comes to fruition, then that's very rewarding as a broadcaster. And no different than a crew chief, I'm not always right. So, sometimes I'll forecast something, I go, holy crap, this didn't even come close to coming to fruition. But, it's just the passion of the sport, the competition.
Again, you haven't fallen out of love with it.
No, and I couldn't imagine. I never saw myself doing this broadcasting. In the mid to late 90s, I did some broadcasting for what was then TNN and TBS, and even did a couple races for CBS. But I never saw myself doing it, making a living. I figured when they put me 6 foot under, I'd still be trying to decide 2 tires or 4 the next stop. But I was offered the opportunity with Fox. Very tough decision. Toughest decision I've ever had to make in my entire life. I involved my family, the conversations my wife and I had, toiling over this, endless. And, there were a few reasons that I did it, Kelly. I knew it was going to be a very small group that did the crew chief analyst side of this with this new package. And I felt like if I didn't take it, I may never get the opportunity again, and that I would probably look back over my shoulder and go, what if? The other reason is at that point, Fox was only offering me a 2-year deal, and I felt strongly that if I went and did it for 2 years and they didn't like me or I didn't like them, I could go back. We see it with coaches all the time. I think it's a little harder with a crew chief in NASCAR, but I still felt like I could do that. But I've got to say, July of 2000, finally, right before Indy, I made the decision to make the move, and it's one I've never looked back over my shoulder at. Not even once.
Well, I have kept you for longer than I said.
No, I told Megan whatever you needed. I love telling my story. It's I hit the ground running every morning.
Yeah.
I run 24/7, but I love doing what I'm doing.
And that's why I wanted to talk, and it was fantastic. So I really wanted to dig into that broadcast side because, again, it's just you. I feel like personally, you really bring so much to the broadcast. What you can point out, again, how you can forecast stuff. So I appreciate it.
No, and seriously, Sunday, if you get a chance and you want to come up during the race and just peek in. Feel free to.
I'm really going to want to take you up on that offer.
Feel free to. Our booth is not one of the broom closets like we have a lot of places. It's a fairly good sized booth.
All right. I'm going to have to take you up on that offer. Thank you, Larry.
No, thank you. Thank you.